Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast IDP edition. I'm Jon Macri coming to you on a special Thanksgiving episode of the pod where we're dropping this a day early since every team is playing this week and there are 4 games between Thursday and Friday to be played. So I wanted to make sure to get this info out there as early as possible because it is such a crucial part of the season where we must get those lineups locked and loaded for a W in week 13. Only 2 weeks remain before the fantasy playoffs, so let's get it. All right, folks, it's a big week in the NFL, but an even bigger week for fantasy football. The race to the playoff gets tighter here. Like I said, we only have 2 weeks of the fantasy regular season remaining, which includes this week. So hopefully I can cover as much of the data, matchups, and information as possible to get your IDP lineups ready to rock here. It's just me this week, no guest because of the weird recording schedule. I'm recording this at 11:15 Eastern time, basically in the evening, and there was no way I was going to ask anyone else to keep that same schedule for a potential 2-hour block of time. So instead, I'm riding solo, and that will hopefully keep the episode tighter time wise as well. I did mention it on the recap pod from this week as well that I'm likely going to record the rest solo the rest of the way here just because of my schedule and to get the episodes out in a timely manner. So I appreciate everyone being supportive of that. I'm definitely going to have guests back in the off season to cover all kinds of fun and interesting IDP topics, but rest of this season it's just me. I do apologize to anyone disappointed in that. I love having guests as well and talking to the different folks from around the IDP world. But it does make things a little bit easier here for me rest of the way in what has been a very busy season. So we're going to still do our usual thing here. I'm going to go game by game as per usual. I'll include the timestamps in the episode description as well. And as always, if there's anything that maybe I don't cover, you can check it out in the IDP fantasy report, check out the IDP rankings. Those will be linked into the episode description. You can get access to those with a PFF Plus subscription as well. And actually right now you can get 35% off that subscription with the promo code SCORE35. You'll get access to everything on the site, fantasy tools, articles, rankings, grades, snap counts, the NFL draft big board, all of it. And you can take advantage of that 35% offer right now through December 2nd. And again, using the promo code SCORE35. All right, that's enough of the preamble there. Let's get into the games now, starting with game 1 of Thanksgiving Thursday, the Chicago Bears against the Detroit Lions. And we'll start with the Chicago Bears here. Really quickly, their defensive line, it's really only Montez Sweat that we're really interested in here, like Gervon Dexter. Anyways, whatever his name, Gervon Dexter, we'll call him. For DT required leagues, it's a nice matchup for tackles. But really, pass rush wise, not great here. Montez Sweat, more of a low end edge 2, edge 3 this week, with just there being so many options and this being kind of a less ideal matchup. He did get a sack last week in overtime, so that was good, but really not popping in terms of his pass rush metrics. 67.3 pass rush grade is the lowest for him so far since the lowest for him since 2021 so far this season. And he should see a lot of Penei Sewell this week, so don't love that for Montez Sweat. As far as the Chicago linebackers go, TJ Edwards, I mean, he gave us a scare in the first half last week by doing literally nothing. It had nothing on the stat sheet. And as someone who thought, his 7.5 tackle line was a lock, I was definitely sweating that one. He ended up getting there, but it was not with ease. This is a prime tackle matchup again, so I'm still treating him as a potential top 12 option this week. Tremaine Edmonds, more of kind of an LB2. Kevin Byard, also been really a must-start option at this point in the season. He's been excellent. Safety 4 on the year. Yeah, Lions giving up the seventh most tackles per game to opposing safeties. I will say keep an eye out for Elijah Hicks and his availability as a potential streamer if you need him as well, just being a good matchup here. Otherwise, Jonathan Owens should be a solid fill in again for those in need. And then Kyler Gordon, often used in CB required leagues, not expecting a full workload for him this week. He's the team's nickel corner. The Lions only spend about 56% of their snaps out of 11 personnel. That ranks 25th among teams this year. Chicago cornerbacks as a whole, they really aren't ideal here because only Jalen Johnson has been a full-time player, and he's not exactly a high-end IDP asset. On the Lions side of things, Zadarius Smith, we'll start with him. He had a pretty quiet pass rushing game for the Lions this past week. Really, the entire defensive line did, but Zadarius Smith's really the one that we want to kind of focus in on. I think he can be a solid fill-in option this week if you have injury issues at the position or something like that. Caleb Williams is letting a high rate of pressures turn into sacks, and I mean, he's taken some pretty dumb sacks really on the year. So, if I'm betting on anyone on this defensive line, I'll take their best pass rusher who's seeing a pretty healthy snap share here, and that's Zadarius Smith. For the linebackers, Jack Campbell, solid LB2 option this week. He played 100% of snaps in week 12, obviously with Alex Anzalone out. Malcolm Rodriguez's role still feels fairly safe considering David Long only played, I think, 24% of the snaps last week. And now it's a short week. So Rodriguez should be in that 90% range again, maybe a little bit lower if they do give David Long a little bit more work. But the only thing with Rodriguez, we've talked about it before. He might spend a decent chunk of his snaps on the edge, which we don't necessarily love for tackle efficiency. It's really not even necessarily a spot where most people will have to risk it by putting Rodriguez into the lineup because, again, every team is playing this week. But if you do play him, then he should be a fine option. And then Brian Branch, Kirby Joseph, I mean, they've been solid. Brian Branch, safety one, or a safety one, I should say. And then Kirby Joseph, more of a fringe, kind of safety two, safety three, because of that deep role. We could see a little bit of inconsistency there in his production. So that's the first Thursday Thanksgiving game. The second one is the New York Giants and the Dallas Cowboys. So starting with the New York Giants, Azeez Ojulari was placed on injured reserve with his toe injury. All this really does is make Kayvon Thibodeaux a more comfortable play because we don't have to worry about Ojulari eating into his snap share. Thibodeaux continues to just be like a volume dependent IDP option. He should play enough to kind of fall into production, enough that he can be an IDP starter, but I'm still probably treating him as more of like a low end edge 2, edge 3 type, just because the pass rush metrics haven't really been very good there. So I don't have a lot of confidence in him just yet. Brian Burns, on the other hand, can continue to be a weekly starter. Should see quite a bit of rookie Tyler Guyton, who has struggled this year. And then, Cooper Rush is going to be a quarterback again. So far, he's done a decent job avoiding sacks, but we've seen these things kind of deteriorate quickly for non-starting caliber quarterbacks in the NFL before. So not overly concerned there for Brian Burns or for Dexter Lawrence. No question about starting him in DT required leagues as well. For the Giants linebackers, Bobby Okereke and Micah McFadden, that is, Dallas has been a good matchup for opposing linebackers, so you're good to start Bobby Okereke in all formats. McFadden could be a deeper league play just because of his fluctuating snap share, but I'm not starting him over any 100% snap linebackers. Tyler Nubin as well. We talked about his great IDP usage last week, playing a ton in the box as of late. Did it again last week with 51% in the box and led the team in total tackles with 12. Dallas has not been great for safety tackles, so Nubin probably more on that fringe safety one territory for me this week, but still like him because of the role. Jason Pinnock returned last week after missing a couple games, and that didn't affect Nubin's usage, which was great to see. So probably not starting Pinnock in most leagues, but Tyler Nubin, I think, we're still continuing to trust him because of the usage. And then lastly for the Giants, Andrew Phillips or Drew Phillips, Can be a decent CB streamer this week. He's the nickel corner there. The Cowboys are playing the sixth highest rate of 11 personnel. Should see a good enough snap share to kind of make an impact, with Dallas giving up the sixth most tackles per game to cornerbacks as well. And then for Dallas, I mean, Micah Parsons, we continue to treat him as a high-end edge one. Two sack games over his last three since returning from injury. He gets a poor Giants offensive line and Tommy Cutlets at quarterback. It's hard not to love Micah Parsons this week. Eric Kendricks, DeMarvion Overshone at linebacker, still treating both of these guys as starters. They're both in full-time roles. It's not the best matchup. They're probably both outside the top 12 for me, but not too far. Donovan Wilson at safety. If you've been relying on him, I'd look for another option this week. He rotated in and out with Wanye Thomas last week, which resulted in just 69% of snaps for Donovan Wilson. He already hasn't been amazing this season, but with that usage, he's even less ideal for IDP. So I'm staying away from the Dallas safeties this week in what's just been like an average matchup against the Giants anyways. And then, definitely worth highlighting Josh Butler, the cornerback for the Dallas Cowboys, who was filling in for Trayvon Diggs. Trayvon Diggs was a DNP on Tuesday, so he did not practice. Butler last week, in relief of Trayvon Diggs, delivered a team-leading 12 total tackles, a sack, and 3 pass breakups. He was awesome. Whether he can keep up that pace, I mean, obviously I have my doubts, but the Commanders went after him. They targeted him 12 times in that game. Like, if the Giants have a similar game plan, Butler could cook again. Giants are already giving up the third most tackles per game to the cornerbacks, though that number has been below average over the last 3 games. So could go either way here, but Butler might still be worth a stream, especially considering the production from last week. And then obviously if Trayvon Diggs is out. So if Diggs is back in, then we're not necessarily considering him, because Deron Bland is also back. So that's the only situation we'd be putting Josh Butler in there. Okay, I will go on to the last Thanksgiving game here in just a second. But first, I want to give a shout out to our friends at DraftKings. If you're looking for the best way to win huge prizes during one of the best NFL weeks of the year, look no further than DraftKings, the official daily fantasy partner of the NFL. This Thanksgiving, you can play free for a $1 million top prize. That's right. Any customer, new or existing, can play free for the $1 million top prize with their next $5 deposit. Say you need something exciting going on in the Dallas Cowboys New York Giants game. You got Cooper Rush, Tommy DeVito in there for the second Thanksgiving game. And if you're a believer in maybe one of them as a strong start, then what better way to show it than getting in on the action at DraftKings? Make it a very happy Thanksgiving with DraftKings. All customers can download the DraftKings app and use code PFF. That's code PFF to play for a free shot at the $1 million top prize only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY at 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. Minimum $5 deposit required. Reward issued as $5 ticket for November 28th Fantasy Football Millionaire. Okay, the final Thanksgiving Thursday game is the Miami Dolphins and the Green Bay Packers. And I want to start with Chop Robinson because he's been on a run here over the past month. He had a 35% win rate in week 11, and then he follows that up with a 50% win rate in week 12. It was against a poor New England offensive line, sure, but really impressive stuff here from the rookie. He also now has 3 sacks in his past 4 games. He posted a career high 90.8 pass rush grade last week as well. I think there should be a lot of excitement around Chop Robinson for dynasty purposes, especially if he keeps this up the rest of the season. But for this week, I do worry about this matchup for him against the Packers. Green Bay is the best pass blocking offensive line in the league, and Jordan Love owns the second best pressure to sack conversion rate in the league at just 10%. So not to say it'll be impossible for Chop, especially if he plays like he has these past few weeks, but this level of competition this week is much tougher. So I'm tempering expectations, at least for this week for now. And then at linebacker, it looks like it'll be Jordan Brooks and Tyrell Dodson as the full-time linebackers this week. Anthony Walker suffered a hamstring injury and is unlikely to play. It's just an average matchup, but I'd expect both guys to play full-time snaps, so fine to fire them up if needed. And then lastly, I also kind of like Kader Kohu as a decent streamer for cornerback this week. He played 100% of the snaps last week with Kendall Fuller out, and he split his time outside and in the slot, which kept him on the field. The Packers are giving up the 10th most tackles per game to cornerbacks, and they're top 5 in that regard over the last 3 games. So if Kendall Fuller can't go again, especially, really like the opportunity here for Kader Kohu. Green Bay. I, I want to talk about Rashawn Gary, but I almost don't want to speak it too loud at the chance of jinxing it. But Gary now has 4 sacks over his last 5 games after just 1 through his first 6. The only concern here is that the pass rush metrics haven't necessarily been amazing, but it's not the worst matchup, if only because Tua has a tendency to take sacks. Like, I'm still probably only treating Rashawn Gary as like a high-end edge 3 right now this week, but it's at least promising to see that he's getting a little bit more production and hopefully, can keep it going. But again, tempering expectations still, just because we haven't really seen those strong pass rush metrics that he's really capable of, that he's shown before. And then for the linebackers, really interesting stuff here in Green Bay right now. Quay Walker, look, he played really well last week. It was actually one of his best games as a pro. He finished with a 91.4 overall grade. Wasn't amazing like IDP wise, but just wanted to put that out there, see if maybe he can keep it going. But the more interesting names here are going to be potentially Eric Wilson, who might be in for a full-time role because Edgerrin Cooper and Isaiah McDuffie are in danger of missing this next game. McDuffie was filling in for Cooper this past week and played a near full-time role. It was like 95% of snaps of the non-garbage time snaps. We talked about that in the recap show. Unfortunately, McDuffie picked up an ankle injury and did not practice on Tuesday. So that would mean a bigger role for Eric Wilson in a nice matchup against the Dolphins, but still might treat him as kind of a deeper league option, but definitely somebody to kind of keep in mind there if you really need the help at linebacker. And it looks like Isaiah McDuffie might not be able to go this week, as well as Edgerrin Cooper. So could be a sneaky little fill-in for Eric Wilson. Okay, moving to the Friday game now, and it is the Las Vegas Raiders and the Kansas City Chiefs playing on Black Friday. And we'll start with the Raiders here. Max Crosby, 5 straight games of 100% of snaps. He hasn't missed a snap in 5 games. The only problem is he hasn't had a sack since week 7 either, right? So he's definitely due. Unfortunately, the schedule isn't making it easy on him after getting that really good Denver O-line last week and the quick to throw Bo Nix. This week, he has to deal with the Kansas City Chiefs offensive line and the elusive Patrick Mahomes. So we're still starting Crosby because even without a sack last week, like, we see how valuable he can be in that 100% snap role. He's delivering tackles for loss. He still creates like a safer production floor while we kind of wait for that massive upside, right? So I'm definitely fine still starting him here, even in the tougher matchup. As far as the linebackers go for the Raiders, I'm treating Robert Spillane probably as like a high-end LB2 this week. I would push him for maybe LB1, but Kansas City's year as a whole has resulted in the 8th most tackles per game to linebackers. They're actually giving up the fewest tackles per game over the last 3 games to linebackers. So slightly concerning there for Spillane, or else he'd be in that LB1 range this week. Divine Diablo, that is more of kind of an LB4. With every team playing this week, he's not a full-time linebacker. There's no need to kind of force him into lineups if you have better options. And then Trayvon Merrick, continuing to trust him in that kind of top 12 safety range just because of that great usage in the box. Kansas City giving up the eighth most tackles per game to safeties. I know he's cooled down a little bit here recently, but the usage hasn't gone away, which says that that production can come back here on any given weekend, and especially when you get a nice matchup like this, it's a good time for him to kind of bounce back. And then on Kansas City, Chris Jones, the sack drought continued this past week. He had a really strong performance again on the field, like NFL wise, 82.4 pass rush grade, 23% win rate. He played 85.5% of snaps. He continues to be one of the better bets to deliver like a multi-sack game on any given week as far as DTs go, but it just hasn't happened this season, which is, again, just the unfortunate side of variance with sacks, right? So it could happen this week. Aiden O'Connell at quarterback. We'll see if that helps or not. It's a small sample size this season for Aiden O'Connell, and he hasn't taken a ton of sacks. But again, Chris Jones, he's another guy that's more than due. Nick Bolton, average matchup this week, treating him as a high-end LB3. We've talked about his poor schedule here going forward. And then Brian Cook actually was the one other player that I wanted to highlight for the Kansas City Chiefs. His usage has improved over the past 2 weeks. He's averaged 44% of his snaps lined up in the box. That's much better than the 27% average in the box over his first 9 games of the season. So last week, Cook, he was able to deliver more than 6 tackles for only the second time this season. And as a result, we could help kind of maybe boost his IDP value going forward if that usage in the box holds. It's not necessarily the best matchup this week, but again, we do like the usage. And if it holds, there will be better weeks to kind of plug him into lineups as a sneaky good play here. So keep an eye on Brian Cook. You don't necessarily need to start him this week, but if that usage kind of continues, I think we could find some better matchups to plug him in as a starter. Okay, let's go to the Houston Texans and the Jacksonville Jaguars. And starting with the Texans, I mean, Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson, they dominated that Titans offensive line / Will Levis as expected. It really feels like forever ago when I was covering both of these guys as players to kind of be patient with on one of the recap shows early in the year, and now they're on fire here, and we don't need to worry about them in our starting lineups. Even if they do have down games every once in a while, like it's okay. We're seeing the payoff with being patient with these guys right here. Hunter specifically 5 sacks in his last 2 games. He's been really hot. Would be awesome to see him keep it going rest of the season. But yeah, we're leaving them locked in as starters. As far as the linebackers for the Texans go, it was definitely nice to see Devin White go back to being the third option and giving our guy Hanky Two Toes back a full-time role. Azeez Al-Shaair, Henry To'oTo'o, they're both full-time options now. We continue to like Azeez Al-Shaair more than To'oTo'o, but fine with either as starts since, those workloads, again, could result in big games for either one. The Jags, they've kind of been a shit matchup for linebackers, and they're even worse without Trevor Lawrence. So hopefully Lawrence is back, but not necessarily treating Azeez Al-Shaair as like a top 12 option this week, I guess. And then the only other thing for Houston was Jalen Petrie was injured last game. He'll miss this game, and he was replaced by Jimmy Ward in that nickel role. It's probably not going to be a full-time role for Ward. The Texans have actually been really kind of stingy at giving us full-time DBs anyways. So like if you have to start one, it's probably Kalen Bullock and then like Eric Murray in the deepest of leagues. But ideally, you have better options because this is also a poor matchup for safeties. And then the Jacksonville defensive line, which is really just their edges. CJ Stroud he's been taking quite a few sacks recently. He hasn't looked as good as his rookie year. This should be a good matchup for Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker. Hines-Allen draws the tougher matchup against Laramie Tunsil. Walker gets Titus Howard, who's no push over either, right? I still prefer Josh Hines Allen because he's clearly the better player. We've talked about it before, not to get too caught up in this like current sample size of box score production between the two. Josh Hines Allen is still much better. And it doesn't even mean Walker can't be a good IDP, right? He's playing a ton. He's found ways to be productive despite kind of the lack of refinement as a pass rusher. Those things just tend to result in maybe a little bit more inconsistency, but treating Josh Hines Allen as like an edge two and Walker not too far behind. For their linebackers, Foye Oluokun and company don't get the best matchup this week. Houston is 25th in tackles allowed tackles allowed to the linebacker position per game. It's still hard to sit like a 100% snap Foye Oluokun. I'm just continuing to temper expectations with him right now because of the poor matchup this week. But because he's also getting those defensive line snaps, we've talked about that before, which, sap tackle efficiency a little bit. So more of an LB2 type this week. And then Devin Lloyd, kind of a deeper league option. And then the Jacksonville safeties, it's a great matchup. Houston's given up the second most tackles per game to safeties. The only problem is Jacksonville is rotating that group quite a bit. Darnell Savage is really the only one to play he was the only one to play full-time snaps last game. Andre Cisco has been rotated off quite a bit over the past 2 games. So if you have to start somebody, it's probably Darnell Savage. But again, it's a tough group to trust. And Savage has been a poor tackler in the past as well. All right, let's move to Tennessee and Washington next. Starting with the defensive line again, Tennessee's D line, I'm fine starting Harold Landry. Like if you've been rolling with him, he's not an amazing option by any means, but if you've been using him as a starter, probably means you don't really have better options. So fine with him. Jeffrey Simmons, kind of locked in as far as DT required leagues go, regardless of matchup. So fine putting him out there. Their linebackers, you can start both Kenneth Murray and Jerome Baker. Both of those guys are at 100% of snaps. Kenneth Murray more of like an LB2, Jerome Baker more of an LB3. We talked about his inefficiencies as a tackler on the recap show this week. And then the safeties for Tennessee, Amani Hooker and Quandre Diggs missed last game. So we saw Mike Brown and Daryl Worley replace them. Brown he's the safer option, though he didn't play 100% last time Amani Hooker was also in there with him as a starter. So there's risk there. But I mean, if Hooker and Diggs are obviously out again, then Mike Brown kind of becomes like this deeper option, though it's just kind of an average matchup. But again, just throwing out some deeper league names there for people who might be looking for options off the waiver wire. Yeah, that's Tennessee. On the Washington side of things, let's start with their defensive line because this group draws the ideal matchup this week versus the awful Tennessee offensive tackles, specifically Nicholas Petit-Frere, their right tackle, who now ranks dead last among 75 qualifying offensive tackles in pass block grade this season. Washington, like they don't have like these locked in horses on their defensive line where this is like a super easy call or makes one of them like top 12 potential for the position. But Dorrance Armstrong, should be the one to get the most of Petit-Frere this week, lining up on that right side of the offensive line. Luckily, Armstrong is also the best pass rusher along the defensive line for this team, so that kind of helps his chances if you're in need of a streaming option. Daron Payne, also kind of fine for DT required leagues. I wouldn't be surprised if Dante Fowler fell into one this week just because of the matchup, but his low playing time just makes him a little bit harder to trust. Frankie Louvu, if we're looking at their linebackers, he's probably one of the better bets to get a sack this week as well. He's blitzing quite a bit. He's found some success there, which has really propped up his IDP scoring on the year. He's LB5 in our scoring, and he's doing it with just a 9.6% tackle rate, which is bad. This says that he's relying on kind of a lot of unstable plays. So we talked about it before, just being careful and how much to trust him going forward, because I have my concerns as far as, his sustainability that I've highlighted in past episodes that hasn't gone away here, even though he's been better over the past couple games. And Jeremy Chin, We talked about the bad matchup last week, possibly ending kind of his hot tackle streak. And it did, unfortunately. It's another bad matchup this week. The usage is still great for Chin. He played 42% of snaps in the box last week, but now he's going against the Tennessee Titans, who are 28th in tackles per game to the safety position. Don't love that for Chin. He'll probably still be in safety two range, but might move him maybe to the lower end of the safety two options this week just because of the matchup. And now we've seen him be affected by those poor matchups as well. And then also Tennessee is last in tackles per game to the cornerback position. So they're not kind to DBs here with that passing offense. Okay, let's go to the Los Angeles Chargers and the Atlanta Falcons next. And starting with the Chargers, Khalil Mack and company. Actually, maybe it should be Thule and company. Tuli Pelotu led the group in snaps last week. He didn't have a great game, though. 0% win rate, zero pressures, which was kind of a rude way to end his hot streak of like 7 sacks in 4 games, but it was bound to end at some point. It was one of the few times all three of Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, and Tuli Pelotu were healthy. Mack potentially was eased in, so only saw like 43% of snaps last week. Bosa was like 58%, and then Thule was 77%. So for this week, I'm ranking them Mac, Thule, Bosa. But keep in mind, they're going up against Kirk Cousins, who is doing a very good job avoiding sacks. The Falcons are giving up the fewest sacks per game on the year, and Kirk Cousins, one of the better ones in the league at helping that cause. So we'll move to their linebackers next. And Diane Henley, really the only one worth trusting. Atlanta's been shit to linebackers too. They're 29th in tackles per game to the linebacker position. Uh, I mean, yeah, we could start Henley, but like super deep leagues, you're starting either like a Denzel Perriman if he's healthy or Nick Neiman, but you have to have almost no other options to consider those two guys. It's really just Henley here. And then Derwin James, couple nice games in a row for him. Got a sack last week. Falcons are giving up the 5th most tackles per game to safeties. I'm fine treating Derwin James as a continued safety one here this week. And moving to Atlanta, start with their defensive line. Well, we don't really. I'm not trusting any of the NPCs on the Falcons defensive line this week. We're not interested there. We'll talk about their linebackers. Caden Ellis is a strong start again. We can continue to kind of monitor the status of Troy Anderson and or JD Bertrand for Nate Landman to have starting potential. If one of those two are active, which they might be coming out of the bye week, I'd expect them to cut into Landman's snap share and hurt his IDP value here, not just for this week, but rest of season as well. So it's a good matchup for Caden Ellis to be in that LB1 range this week. The Chargers among the top 10, giving up tackles per game to the linebackers. But the only way Nate Landman is really going to be startable is if Troy Anderson or JD Bertrand are out for this game, because we've seen the Falcons work those guys in there and cut into his snap share. Atlanta safeties. Not a great matchup for Jesse Bates or Justin Simmons, but it's hard to bench Jesse Bates at this point. Maybe just tempering expectations, even in a bad matchup. Same thing, Atlanta's cornerbacks. It's not a great week for Sweet D. Alford. Chargers play 59% of snaps out of 11 personnel on offense, which is just below average. So not necessarily a reason to stream Sweet D this week. Okay, let's go to the next game on the list, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cincinnati Bengals. So I'll start with the Pittsburgh defensive line. Not that this really needs like a ton of analysis here, because there's not much question about starting TJ Watt or Cam Hayward every week. The only question I guess will be is if Alex Highsmith will be back, or if we can roll with Nick Herbig for another week. So the Bengals offensive line has had their issues, which actually Joe Burrow has been able to deal with for the most part this season. That being said, it is a tougher matchup this week for the Bengals offensive line against TJ Watt and company. If Alex Highsmith is active, I'd be playing him. If he's not, then I'd be fine playing Nick Herbig as well. Patrick Queen, he's a fine kind of LB2, LB3 start, but the more interesting thing here with the Pittsburgh linebackers is Landon Roberts got hurt last game, and Peyton Wilson played almost every snap the rest of the way with Roberts out of the game. So not sure what Roberts' status is right now. That's kind of one of the downfalls of recording on a Tuesday. We don't have reliable practice reports for Sunday games, but Wilson, like if Roberts is out, Wilson might be a nice kind of deep league play. Just know that it comes with some risk because Pittsburgh does want to be able to rotate their linebackers, and they may call up somebody like off the street just so they can do that. But we could get a chance here at least to see if that'll be the case this week with Peyton Wilson and how they deploy those guys. So if you're desperate and Landon Roberts is out, Peyton Wilson might be a fine option, but otherwise it could be a good week to just kind of sit and observe how this usage shakes out if Landon Roberts is out. Deshaun Elliott, and he ended up having a nice game last week against Cleveland, and that was because he played 91.5% of snaps after he had previously been rotating off on third downs the previous 3 weeks to this. He played 86% of those snaps this past week on third down. So another change for the Steelers rotation. The thing with Elliott, like again, because it's so inconsistent, there's definitely risk there. But it does help that he has really good box usage. It's just again, the concern is that if they don't deploy him as a full-time player, it becomes, I don't know, it is at least becoming harder to know when they will or won't do that with his snaps. So I typically want to see like consistent usage before trusting guys like this, but if you're inclined to play Deshaun Elliott, at least he has the box snaps where he might still be able to deliver, even if he isn't at 100% of the total snaps. And then lastly, kind of fun note here on Beanie Bishop. I was talking with the great cornerback whisperer, Mr. Johnny the Greek, because he was asking why the Steelers nickel cornerback Beanie Bishop didn't play closer to like a full-time role this past week against the Browns, who are one of the more 11 personnel heavy offenses in the league. And essentially what we discovered is that the Browns went away from that in that last game specifically, which likely had a lot to do with the weather and them wanting to run the ball instead, because they were last in the league in run rate coming into that week, and then they ran the ball at a top 10 rate that week specifically, which meant a lot more 12 and 21 personnel, and it took Beanie Bishop off the field on defense, which obviously sucked for anyone looking to stream him as an option that week. But yeah, it was just interesting stuff there of how these teams kind of react, and it's good to know too with with weather changes and stuff like that. It maybe gives us a little bit of an example of what to expect from certain teams in certain situations and what kind of personnel they might use, and then how that affects our defensive players as well, right? And Beanie Bishop coming off the field more because the Browns wanted to run the ball more in that snowy weather is a good example of that. So Beanie Bishop this week, the Bengals play below average 11 personnel for what it's worth if anybody's looking at streaming him this week. Okay, Bengals side of things, Trey Hendrickson, definitely locked in starter. I mean, Russell Wilson can't help himself from taking sacks, and Hendrickson is one of the best at it. So don't really care about the rest of the Cincinnati defensive linemen. Sam Hubbard has just been so bad. It's hard to trust them, even in a great matchup. Like, can he get home? Sure. Is the floor worth trusting him for like maybe one sack over other better pass rushers at our disposal? I don't think so. So really just Trey Hendrickson here. Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt, though, both should be in starting lineups this week. The Steelers are giving up the most tackles per game to the linebacker position on the year. Both of those guys are 100% snap players, so love to see that. And then the Cincinnati safeties. So we're still going to monitor the Jordan Battle versus Von Bell situation, which will hopefully escalate in Battle's favor coming out of the bye, but it's not something we know for sure. So really just going to keep a close eye on it coming out of the bye week here to see if we do get a significant shift in Jordan Battle's favor. Okay, let's go to the Seattle Seahawks and the New York Jets next, and we'll start with the Seattle Seahawks defensive line. Boye Mafe, Derek Hall, Leonard Williams, all kind of like mid-range options at the position. Leonard Williams included. I know he's coming off a 2.5 sack game, which is great, but that really hasn't been his calling card this season. So hard to expect kind of more of the same. The Jets' interior offensive line is at least a better unit as well than their offensive tackles as well. So just keeping that in mind with Leonard Williams. Ernest Jones, more of maybe an LB2 this week. It's a bad matchup. Jets giving up the 27th most tackles per game to the linebacker position. I'm still sorting rankings here, but Tyrese Knight might end up more in that kind of LB4-ish range, potentially lower, just because of not having a full-time role and the poor matchup as well. But Ernest Jones is a fine starter. It's just more Tyrese Knight is the question mark here, playing around that 75-80% of snap range, and in a bad matchup for linebackers. So tempering expectations for him as well. Seattle safeties. The Jets are last in tackles per game to safeties. It's hard to bench Julian Love, but it depends on your options, right? He'll be more in that safety 2 range for me this week, but he's been solid all year. Not sure if we'll see Rayshon Jenkins overtake Kobe Bryant this week. Jenkins did return off IR last week, but was only 50% of snaps. So we'll see if that was just maybe the Seahawks easing him in, or if they like Kobe enough to as a starter. He did get that pick 6, and maybe that helped his case. But I think this week will give us a better idea of that. And then Devin Witherspoon, he's CB1 this week. Seattle's given up the 6th most tackles to cornerbacks. Witherspoon's going to play in the slot. He's going to play outside, and he's just so damn good. He's going to be a top option again this week. Jets defensive line is next as we move over to that team. And I'll be interested to see if Hassan Reddick's snap share will increase coming out of the bye as well. Like, he hasn't played a ton, usually around 40%. So that'll be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. Not necessarily starting him, just because that snap share has been so low, but I think this will be a good week and a good indication of whether they're going to feel comfortable playing him consistently more over 50% to in that 60% range each week. And then Will McDonald, he's cooled down kind of as expected. It's a good matchup where he can kind of be like a low end edge 2 / high end edge 3 again. But again, rankings, I'll link them in the episode description when I finalize them. And then Quinnen Williams, he's still a starter in DT required leagues. And it's been nice to see that he's been producing more lately as well. For the Jets linebackers, no idea if CJ Mosley will be back this week. Even if he is, we've seen the Jets utilize him as the base linebacker only coming off injury before this season. So we should still be safe to start Jamie Sherwood. Just know that the matchup is kind of trash. The Seahawks are giving up the fewest tackles per game to the linebacker position. So Quincy Williams and Jamie Sherwood, kind of low end LB2, LB3 type range. And then Chuck Clark is back. Chuck Clark played 1 game before their bye week, coming off injury. The safety there, he played 42% in the box. Could be a decent start this week. Seattle then giving up the 9th most tackles per game to the safety position. Okay, moving on to the Indianapolis Colts and the New England Patriots. After rookie Chop Robinson stayed hot and dominated that poor New England offensive line last week, it might be time for another rookie edge to do this exact same. Laiatu Latu has been heating up here as of late. 90.8 pass rush grade last week. That was a career high for him, and he did it against the Detroit Lions. So he also got a sack. Now it has a sack in back-to-back games. He played 60% of snaps last week. Like, it might not be the worst week to start Latu if you need him. Kwity Paye, definitely the safer bet to take advantage of this matchup, as well as obviously DeForest Buckner. He's locked into lineups, but we'll be really interested to see if Laiatu Latu could kind of stay hot here against New England in what was just proven to be a good matchup by Chop Robinson, another rookie last week. So really keeping an eye on Laiatu Latu this week. Indy's linebackers, we're starting Zaire Franklin, EJ Speed, Patriots giving up 7th most tackles per linebackers. No concerns there for those guys. Nick Cross continued his tackle parade this past week. 14 tackles last week. He's a locked in every week starter. Just shout out to Gus Bradley and that box heavy deployment there for Nick Cross. So let's go to New England. Their defensive line. I don't love this matchup for anyone on New England's defensive line. Keon White, like he's been great all season, but tough matchup here. And Anthony Richardson continues to be great at avoiding sacks. It was great to see Christian Barmore back. He got a sack last week, but again, monitoring his usage and his pass rush metrics for those DT required leagues, because he'll have potential if he can regain his form from last season. And we talked about that on the recap episode. I don't need to go into too much detail there as to why. I mean, New England's linebackers, we talked about this on the recap episode as well. There are no full-time linebackers here. The Colts are second last in tackles per game to linebackers. So it's basically Jelani Tavai if you're desperate. Otherwise, no thank you. Kyle Duggar is the lone safety worth trusting in New England. He's playing a ton in the box. It's just an average matchup, but he's still a strong IDP to start each week just because of the usage. And then the last piece here was Christian Gonzalez. It was great to see him obviously score a defensive touchdown last week. We're not banking on that again, though he's certainly talented enough to do so. He's also so talented that teams mostly avoid targeting him. So he sees very few opportunities for kind of IDP production. Colts are 30th in tackles per game to cornerback. So just make sure you're not chasing the Christian Gonzalez production from last week. Okay, let's go to the Arizona Cardinals and the Minnesota Vikings next. And we'll start with the Arizona. Well, I was going to say we'll start with the Arizona defensive line, but it's another defensive line made up of NPCs that we could mostly ignore. So let's start with the Arizona linebackers. Kaiser White, treating him as kind of a high-end LB2 this week. Minnesota's given up the 3rd most tackles per game to the linebacker position. And actually, over their last 3 games, they are giving up the most tackles per game to the linebacker position. So that could be good here for Kaiser White to kind of get back on track. He's been a little quiet this season. Mac Wilson, still kind of a deep league option only, just considering his usage on the defensive line and as a blitzer. Obviously, we're starting Budda Baker, even in a bad matchup. He's just been elite. But Jalen Thompson, if he can't go, then Dadrion Taylor Demerson is going to start again. But I don't think it's really a good enough matchup to trust those two this week, whichever one ends up playing. I think it's really kind of a Budda only week here. And then, Arizona's cornerbacks. I really liked Garrett Williams last week. He didn't get the tackles to let me hit on his kind of over-under prop, but he did get an interception to help with his IDP value. This week, it's a below-average matchup for his potential usage, with Minnesota ranking below average in 11 personnel. So not necessarily going back to the Garrett Williams this week. Okay, and then on Minnesota's side of things, their edges, I mean, Arizona's offensive line and Kyler Murray have been pretty good limiting sacks against them, but I don't know, it's impossible to sit Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard right now. They're playing amazingly well. They deserve to be in lineups every single week here. Unfortunately for their linebackers, Ivan Pace was placed on IR with a hamstring injury. Blake Cashman, going to be really the only one worth trusting. I got him in that LB1 range this week, with the Cardinals giving up the 2nd most tackles per game to the linebacker position. If you're really desperate, Cameron Grugier-Hill, only because it's a good matchup, but don't expect to see him playing a lot of snaps. I would be expecting probably in that 50% range for Grugier-Hill. And then Minnesota safeties too. There's now been like at least a couple weeks in a row where Josh Metellus is the clear 3rd in the pecking order for this group, at least as far as snaps go. And it's not like the snaps are so bad. Like, he played 75% and then 88% respectively over the last 2 weeks, but certainly playing less in the box than he did last year and more in the slot. So I'll be interesting to see if that shifts at all with Ivan Pace out and if he goes back to more of that linebacker role or not. But for now, just more of kind of a low end safety two at best, and really kind of same thing as Cameron Bynum and Harrison Smith, really. So, but all of those guys kind of interchangeable here throughout the season. And yeah, if you have them, you can start them, but just depends on who your other options are. Okay, that is that one. Let's go to the Los Angeles Rams and the New Orleans Saints next. And I'll start with the Los Angeles Rams defensive line. This has been such a productive group between Jared Verse, Byron Young, Kobe Turner, Braden Fisk, and now they face the worst pass blocking unit in the league. The only problem is Derek Carr owns the best pressure to sack conversion rate in the league at just under 10%. So I think, I'm still starting these guys for the most part. Just be aware that sacks, they are a quarterback stat, and Derek Carr has done a really nice job at not letting his offensive line kill him this season. So we could start them, but we're not expecting necessarily like maybe a huge blow up game from anyone this week. Okay, the Rams, the Rams linebackers. What a gross group. We talked about them on the recap episode as well. Omar Spates is just a bad linebacker. Christian Roseboom really just kind of average at best. Neither of these guys are full time. Troy Reader's still on IR. These are all just deep league options here. Really hard to trust at this point. As far as their safeties go, though, Cameron Curl and Quentin Lake, both full time. It was interesting last week that Curl actually played 51% of snaps in the box. Quentin Lake played just 18% in the box, but 47% in the slot. So Curl had the better game for IDP as well. So really, it's kind of here we go again with these two, and the constant change in usage. Whether it sticks rest of season or not, probably not. Just considering how often they've changed this season, but maybe we can get it 2 weeks in a row. For now, I'm still kind of treating Quentin Lake as ahead of Curl for IDP until we do see some consistency there. But Curl at least looks like he's in a better position than he was a couple weeks ago when he was rotating with Cam Kinchens, right? Okay, New Orleans is next. We'll start with their defensive line really quick because it's really only Carl Granderson if you have to play one. Granderson finally got back in the sack column last week, or last game, I should say. They were on a bye week last week. They played before the bye, and that was against the Cleveland Browns. So as bad as the Rams offensive line has been, at least Matthew Stafford hasn't been Jameis Winston or Deshaun Watson levels of oblivious when it comes to avoiding sacks. So, yeah, Granderson really just if you need him. The linebackers for the Saints, it's a poor matchup for a group that's really kind of been untrustworthy for IDP with Demario Davis and Pete Werner. Last we saw Werner, he only played 66% of snaps, so have a really hard time trusting him in lineups this week. And then Demario Davis, I mean, he could be a low-end LB3 if you need him. Again, the Rams giving up the 24th most tackles per game to linebackers, but Demario Davis is another one of those guys that's been really inefficient here in the latter stretch of his career. And maybe the most interesting part of this Saints defense is their cornerbacks. Alontae Taylor, who is the CB1 on the year right now, his move to the outside has potentially taken away kind of a lot of his upside. We've talked about that before, but just to kind of highlight it again, since his move to that full-time outside corner role, he hasn't blitzed even once over the past 3 games. He was averaging 3.5 blitz attempts per game prior to that change, and then that led to 5 sacks on the season. Meanwhile, Ugo Amadi has taken over that role, and over his past 4 games that he's been in there, he's now the one averaging 3.5 blitz attempts per game. He just has the 1 sack so far, but this is also the better tackle role in the right matchup. And this is the right matchup against the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams played the second highest rate of 11 personnel in the league at 83%. So should be plenty of snaps for Amadi to be an IDP starter this week. You could start Taylor as well. I should say I don't want to completely eliminate Taylor from starting lineups. He's been really productive even from the outside, but I think Amadi is going to be the kind of better option here going forward in the right matchup. That is. Okay, let's go to Tampa Bay and Carolina next, and we'll start with the Tampa Bay defensive line. Tough matchup for these guys this week. The Yaya Diabis, Vita Vea, Kalijah Cansey's of the world. The Carolina offensive line has been solid. Bryce Young is doing a really nice job avoiding sacks. The Panthers themselves are only giving up 1.5 sacks per game this season, which is the second lowest behind who we talked about before, the Atlanta Falcons and Kirk Cousins. So treating these guys on potentially the lower end of the scale this week. And then for their linebackers, I continue to worry about Levante David's kind of low floor right now. He's been one of the most inefficient tacklers at the position this season, much like with Frankie Louvu. He's kind of lived off these big plays, and he's also rushing the passer quite a bit, which hurts that tackle floor. Carolina is also a bad matchup for linebacker tackles. So I'll be lower on Levante David this week, as well as KJ Britt, not playing a full-time role. So he's more kind of that LB4 and later KJ Britt in a matchup like this. But Levante David specifically, I'm going to be a little bit lower on than most weeks, especially in this matchup. And just considering the concern here for regression if those big plays don't hit. And then Tampa Bay safeties, Antoine Winfield Jr., we can start him. It's a bad matchup, so more of a kind of a safety too. But Jordan Whitehead is now out for the year with a torn pec. So Mike Edwards replaced him as a full-time safety in this defense. Christian Izien has been the team's slot defender. And then, we're probably not starting Edwards considering this matchup, but if you're in need of a full-time safety, you can at least add him right now. And then Jamel Dean also returned as a full-time outside corner, but not someone that we need to consider for IDP just yet. On the Carolina side of things, we'll start with their defensive line as well. I didn't have high expectations for this group last week, but they got pressure on Patrick Mahomes in a tough matchup. Jadeveon Clowney even landed a sack and a half. DJ Wanham got a sack. So they're still not really like weekly IDP options outside of like deeper leagues where you're maybe looking for like a volume dependent play, but it was nice to actually see some kind of signs of life there in a tough matchup. And maybe they can keep that going and be a little bit more reliable for IDP since they do have that good volume at the very least. Their linebackers in Carolina, Josie Jewell, kind of in that LB2-ish range for me this week. Trevin Wallace is much lower than that. He only played 62% of snaps last week and has played now fewer than 70% of snaps in 2 straight games. So Trevin Wallace definitely trending in the wrong direction here. And then Carolina safeties, Xavier Woods and Jordan Fuller, they're streaming options this week. Tampa Bay top 10 matchup for safeties. And then for their cornerbacks as well, Carolina, Tampa Bay giving up the 4th most tackles per game to cornerbacks. So guys like Mike Jackson will be an option. JC Horn had a nice game last week, and he's on pace for a career year in total tackles because he's just getting targeted more than he ever has as well. He already has a career high 52 targets this season, and there's still plenty of games remaining. So he could be a nice option this week. And then maybe even Dane Jackson, who's been working as their primary slot, could get some opportunities in a good matchup against Tampa Bay, who's 5th in 11 personnel rate. All right, we're getting there. Let's go to Philadelphia and the Baltimore Ravens next. And starting with the Eagles really quick, Brandon Graham is done for the year. Another victim to the torn pectoral muscle this past week. So Nolan Smith saw a pretty nice snap increase. He played a season high 61% of snaps last week. It's really kind of a bad matchup though for both Nolan Smith and Josh Sweat going against the Baltimore Ravens offensive line and Lamar Jackson, obviously, that, don't give up a lot of sacks, and Lamar does a really nice job avoiding sacks. Same thing with Jalen Carter. Obviously, we gassed him up last week as it didn't work out, but as the boss highlighted on the Sunday Night Football broadcast, Carter was being double teamed at a higher rate than he's been all season. So that ended up leading to Milton Williams getting things opened up for him to fall into 2 sacks. Was really hoping that would be Carter, but they obviously gave the extra attention there. I still really like Jalen Carter. Obviously, getting that attention is a good sign that he's considered one of the bigger threats in the NFL. So I'm still trying to buy low on him for dynasty leagues if you can, just because that production has been quiet, but the pass rush metrics are among the best at the position. For the Eagles linebackers, it was a quieter game from Zach Bond last week, no doubt about that. But a slightly better matchup this week, going against the Ravens, who are 15th in tackles per game to linebackers. So can get back on track here. I'm still treating him as kind of an LB1 type option. Nakobe Dean has also been really great and playing really well here lately. He can be a strong start as well. As for Cooper DeJean, he's been a fine CB required start. I think even with Baltimore playing the lowest rate of 11 personnel in the league at 31%, the Eagles might just leave DeJean out there to defend against Mark Andrews, for example, so that he doesn't come off the field. I think DeJean getting a little bit non-typical usage from the slot corner here in Philadelphia. Okay, Baltimore is up next. Odafe Owe has now 3.5 sacks over his last 2 games. Kyle Van Noy also got a sack, his first sack in his last 5 games last week. So it is a tougher matchup for them this week against Jordan Mailata and Lane Johnson. So tempering expectations for them this week. Same thing with Madubuike, though he's still kind of a start in DT required leagues. The most interesting thing is going to be the Baltimore linebackers. Roquan Smith missed last week. So want to keep an eye on if he's unlikely to play again, because it was a very clear rotation at linebacker with Malik Harrison leading the way. He only played 72.5% of snaps, though. Chris Board and Trenton Simpson really rotated a bunch as well. So this was concerning usage for Simpson, I think, specifically considering he was close to a full-time player with Roquan in the lineup, but they really sheltered him here without Roquan. He only played 43.5% of snaps. I'd only be looking to play Malik Harrison if Roquan Smith is out again, and just for deeper leagues, even though it is a decent matchup, it's not a full-time role. And then if Roquan is back, obviously we're definitely starting him, but I might feel slightly better about Trenton Simpson, though ideally we can wait one more week there just to make sure that this isn't a full-on demotion for Trenton Simpson, because the Ravens have been tinkering with their defensive personnel as of late. And actually, speaking of which, Kyle Hamilton has been playing more of a deep safety role over the past 2 games, as opposed to kind of his typical slot-heavy deployment. His production in week 11 kind of covered it up a bit because he hit that double-digit tackle mark. But in week 12, the output was obviously not up to standards, right? That'll happen with that deep safety role, as we always talk about with the inconsistency from that deep deployment. But I also don't think that this is something the Ravens are necessarily going to go away from either, because their pass defense has played a lot better over the past 2 games with that move, with them moving Marlon Humphrey more in the slot, relying on Brandon Stevens and Nate Wiggins more on the outside, and then pairing Hamilton up with Ardarius Washington to kind of patrol the deep secondary there. So they shut down the Steelers passing game pretty much, and they did the same thing with the Chargers, who had been very hot coming into last week. So I'd say they found kind of a winning formula there, especially compared to early in the year, right? If you've been paying attention to fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks early on, the Ravens were one of the best matchups because of the poor play as a pass defense. But I think they'll start to get a lot tougher here as they've been here in recent weeks because of this shift in their secondary. Okay, let's go on to Sunday Night Football here. We are almost at the end of this long slate. The San Francisco 49ers and the Buffalo Bills. And San Francisco, the big question mark is going to be if Nick Bosa is able to play. He missed last game, obviously, with the hip/oblique injury. he's really the only one that we should have interest in for this matchup against the Bills. Josh Allen does a really nice job avoiding sacks. Bills' offensive line has been one of the better ones in the league. So if Nick Bosa's a go, then we could start him in IDP. Otherwise, really not interested in too many from this group. And then linebacker wise for the 49ers, obviously Fred Warner's locked in as an IDP starter, but it does sound like the practice window will be open for Dre Greenlaw this week, which we should get, I'd say probably at least another week of full-time Devondre Campbell. But I also wouldn't be surprised if Greenlaw, when he does play, probably not this week, but when he does get out there, if he's just used in kind of base personnel as that third linebacker option for those few snaps per game, just to kind of ease him back into game action for a bit. But we'll see. I don't think we necessarily need to worry about that this week, but just keeping an eye on his availability because he sounds like he should be back out there at some point soon. And then on Buffalo, we'll start with their defensive line. It depends on who is at quarterback here. Purdy is progressing. I put his quarterback pressure to sack conversion rate on the screen there for the 49ers, but if it's Brandon Allen, it's definitely better for the Bills pass rushers because as much as Purdy invites pressure, he's still better at avoiding sacks than a Brandon Allen. So Greg Rousseau, though, really the only one with any sort of consistency to trust from this group. And if Trent Williams can't go again, like it's an even better matchup for Gregory Rousseau. So keep an eye out for that matchup for sure. And then the Buffalo linebackers, they also sound like they're getting someone back very soon, potentially this week. Matt Milano could be back this week coming out of the bye. This shouldn't be overly concerning for Terrell Bernard, but it does affect our beloved Princeton, Dorian Williams. If Milano is indeed active, I would not start Dorian Williams at the risk that he not only cuts into Williams' overall snaps, but wipes out his snaps completely and absorbs a full-time role, right? So there are only two linebackers on the field for Buffalo every week. They don't really use a third. So this could be a death blow to Dorian Williams' rest of season IDP value. And then for safeties, it's a nice matchup for guys like Taylor Rapp and DeMar Hamlin, both in that safety 2-ish kind of range. San Francisco giving up the most tackles per game to safeties, though that also likely depends on Brock Purdy because they were well below this season average in that regard with Brandon Allen at the helm. So that's just one more thing to kind of keep an eye on there. All right, last game of the week, Monday Night Football, Cleveland Browns at the Denver Broncos. And I'll start with the Cleveland defensive line. I guess the only player really worth discussing is Myles Garrett. You probably see a lot of red there on the screen for the pass rush matchup for the Browns defensive line. That doesn't matter with Myles Garrett. Even with the risk of a 0 in your lineup, the potential for a 3-sack game, which he's already done twice this season, it's just too great to put him on your bench, right? So Myles Garrett stays locked into lineups. As far as the linebackers go, Jordan Hicks was a solid play against the Steelers last week, giving up the most tackles per game to linebackers, but it is a bad matchup this week, so not expecting the same output. That also moves a player like Mohamed Diabate down the ranks as kind of a non-full-time linebacker. In a bad matchup like this, Denver giving up the 29th most tackles per game to the linebackers. And then Grant Delpit definitely starting almost every week for us in IDP. He's getting that box heavy deployment. It's a great matchup this week. Denver giving up the third most tackles per game to the safety position. So that could be a nice boost for Grant Delpit. Let's go to Denver next and their defensive line, because this group has been really impressive between Zach Allen, Nick Bonito, Jonathan Cooper, John Franklin Myers, hell, even Jonah Ellis recently. Like they've just found a way to get to the quarterback. Bonito obviously on a wicked tear right now with 10 sacks in 10 games. That's going to end at some point, obviously, and then he'll suffer a case of the regression there. But it doesn't look like it'll be this week. He's going against the Browns' bottom 5 offensive line and Jameis Winston, who admittedly did a nice job avoiding TJ Watt last week, but he's still very prone to giving up sacks. So I'd look at these guys as startable again this week where we've been playing them. It's again one of the better matchups in the league for pass rushers. So for a group that's been on fire, it's hard to ignore them this week. As far as the Denver linebackers go, Cody Barton, a fine start as a full-time player here. Justin Sternad, he did play his highest snap share of the season this past week at like 80%, even though he didn't really do much with that opportunity. So his snaps have kind of fluctuated quite a bit since stepping in as that second linebacker. He's likely going to be in that 70% range, give or take, the rest of the way. So really only just treating him as kind of a deep league option. Um, and then lastly, I guess it's just the Denver safeties. The Browns haven't been a great matchup for safeties, but Brandon Jones has been awesome. So I'm fine continuing to kind of ride with him as a startable safety option for IDP. All right. That's a wrap. We did it. That is a full slate all by myself. Very late on a Tuesday / early Wednesday morning to get it out in time for you good folks before Thanksgiving. So if you would be so kind to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, that is the best way to support the show. Also, like I said at the top, I'm likely to ride solo here rest of season. So hopefully this episode worked for you guys, clocking in just over 70 minutes, it looks like. But, if enough of you hated it, let me know that as well. But yeah, I'd be just as open to any positive feedback to it. I look forward to hearing from you all. As a reminder, the IDP Fantasy Report is out now. It's linked in the episode description that lists all my waiver wire targets, snap shares, utilization nuggets, plenty of my thoughts on and notes for every team. The IDP rankings article will be linked in there when it comes out, which won't be until Thursday morning. So what I'll do is I'll link the IDP rankings page for the PFF website in there on Wednesday, probably midday, because that's when I'll have the rankings finalized and people can access those. And you can get access to all that stuff with a PFF Plus subscription. So don't forget to use the promo code SCORE35 for 35% off a PFF Plus subscription. And you could get access to all that stuff, including the IDP Fantasy Report and rankings. But yeah, that's it for today. And this week, I'll be back on Monday morning with a Week 13 IDP recap. So be sure to check that out as well. But yeah, that's it for now. Good luck this week. Happy Thanksgiving to my American friends. And until next time, peace out.